I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I just stood there in my own kitchen, in the house I've owned for 22 years, and I counted. 1, 2, 3. By the time I got to 9, my left ear was ringing. By 14, I couldn't feel my cheek anymore. By the time it stopped, I had counted 27. Not 30. 27. I know because I was very deliberate about it. I needed to remember the exact number. I needed something to hold on to that was real. My son-in-law's name is Terence. He's 41 years old. He runs a landscaping company that my daughter built from the ground up with money I lent her, and he has been walking around for the last 6 years acting like he built it himself with his bare hands and the grace of God. My daughter's name is Vivienne. She's 38. She used to be soft-spoken. She used to call me every Sunday morning without fail, and we'd talk for an hour about nothing. Her garden, a book she was reading, something funny that happened at the grocery store. I don't know exactly when she stopped doing that. I just know that one Sunday I realized it had been 4 months since she called, and when I called her, she sounded like she was reading from a script someone else had written. I'm 64 years old. I retired 2 years ago after 31 years as a hospital administrator in Charlotte, North Carolina. I am not a dramatic woman. I have never in my life raised my voice in public. I raised Vivienne alone after her father left when she was 7, and I did it working double shifts and eating peanut butter sandwiches for lunch so she could have hot meals every night. I say that not for sympathy. I say that so you understand who I am. So you understand that what I did was not impulsive, it was not emotional, it was the most clear-headed decision I've ever made in my life. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to the beginning, the real beginning. Vivienne met Terence at a church picnic in the summer of 2017. He was charming, the way certain men are charming, loud in a room full of people, attentive when he needed something. I didn't dislike him immediately. I want to be honest about that. He made my daughter laugh, and for a while that was enough for me. They got married in 2019. Small ceremony, backyard of a friend's house, nothing elaborate. I paid for most of it because Vivienne asked me to and because I wanted her day to be beautiful. I didn't complain. I wrote the check and I smiled in every photograph. The landscaping business was Vivienne's idea. She'd always had a talent for growing things. She had a business degree from UNC Charlotte and a vision and about 14 months of planning in a notebook she'd been keeping since she was 32. What she didn't have was startup capital. I gave her $47,000. Not a loan, I told her at the time. A gift. Your inheritance early, I said. Use it well. She did, at first. She hired 2 crews, bought proper equipment, got the business licensed, built a client base in the Ballantyne and South Park neighborhoods where people have big lawns and money to spend. Within 3 years, Verdant Grounds, that was the name she chose, was clearing about $280,000 a year in revenue. Terence came on as operations manager around year 2. That was Vivienne's decision, and I respected it. He had organizational skills, she said. He knew how to manage people. What I noticed and didn't say enough about was that Terence also knew how to manage Vivienne. It started subtle. She stopped coming to Sunday dinners as often. Then she stopped coming alone. Terence always came too, which meant our conversations were never quite ours anymore. Then she started repeating his opinions back to me as if they were her own conclusions. When I pointed it out once, gently, she got quiet and changed the subject. By 2023, Terence's name was on the business checking account. I found that out by accident when Vivienne mentioned it in passing and then immediately looked like she wished she hadn't said it. I asked her about it that night, just the 2 of us on my back porch. She said it made sense operationally. She said I was overthinking it. She said Terence had sacrificed a lot to help build what they had. I let it go. I shouldn't have, but I did. Then came the refinancing. In March of 2024, Vivienne called me, a real call, not a text, which already made me uneasy, and told me the business needed to refinance its equipment loans to free up cash flow. She said the bank was asking for a co-signer because they'd had a slow quarter. She said it would only be a formality. She said she'd never miss a payment. Not once. I knew that about her. I co-signed a $95,000 business loan. I want you to sit with that number for a moment. $95,000. That was most of what I had in liquid savings outside of my retirement accounts. I co-signed it because she was my daughter, and I believed her, and because I had spent 31 years working myself half to death so that she would never have to struggle the way I did. For a while, nothing seemed wrong. The payments came through on time. I stopped thinking about it. Then in September of last year, I got a letter from the bank. The account was 60 days past due. I called Vivienne immediately. She didn't answer. I called 3 more times that day. On the 4th call, Terence answered her phone. He told me not to worry about it. He said it was a cash flow timing issue. He said they had it handled. He said, and I remember this exactly, "You don't need to be involved in the day-to-day of the business, Elaine." Elaine, not Mum, not even Mrs. Whitfield. Elaine. I'm going to pause here and tell you something about how I was raised. My mother, God rest her, used to say that you don't let people see you sweat. You handle your business. You don't let your emotions make your decisions for you. I have lived by that my entire adult life. And in that moment on the phone with Terence, every cell in my body was telling me to stay calm, to observe, to wait. So I did. Over the next 6 weeks, I found out the following things, piece by piece. The business had been struggling since early 2024, not just 1 quarter. Terence had taken on 2 large residential contracts that went badly, disputes over work quality, 1 lawsuit, significant penalties. He had not told Vivienne the full extent of it, or she had known and not told me. I still don't know which is true, and I have stopped trying to figure it out. What I know for certain is that by October, the loan was 90 days past due, which meant my credit was affected and the bank was beginning default proceedings. I drove to their house on a Saturday morning. I had called ahead. I wasn't going to ambush my own daughter. I got there at 10 o'clock. Vivienne made coffee. Terence sat at the kitchen table with his arms crossed, and within 4 minutes of me trying to have a calm, adult conversation about the loan and what our plan was going to be, he started. He told me the business problems were not his fault. He told me the market had shifted. He told me the lawsuit was frivolous. And then he told me that I had always undermined him, that I had never respected him, that everything he had built, everything, he said, his voice rising, had been done despite me, not because of me. I said very quietly, "Terence, I need you to lower your voice." He didn't. He stood up from the table. He was about 6 feet from me. He said that I had spent 6 years making his wife doubt him, that I was the reason they'd had problems in their marriage, that everything wrong in his life traced back to my interference. And then he hit me. Open palm, right side of my face, not a slap you could call accidental, deliberate, hard. Vivienne made a sound I had never heard from her before, somewhere between a gasp and a moan. She said his name. Just his name. She didn't move. He hit me again. I didn't move either. I don't know why. I think my brain simply refused to process what was happening fast enough to generate a response. I stood there and I counted and I kept my eyes on him and I did not cry. When he stopped, he sat back down, like it was over, like he'd made a point and now we could move on. Vivienne was shaking. She finally stood up and came to me and touched my arm and said, "Mama, are you okay?" I looked at her. I looked at him. I picked up my purse from the counter where I'd set it down. I said, "I'm going to go home now." And I left. I drove home in complete silence. I didn't turn the radio on. I didn't call anyone. I went inside. I fed my cat. I made myself a cup of tea, and I sat at my kitchen table for about 2 hours going through everything I knew, everything I could do, and everything I was willing to do. I'm going to tell you what I did not do because I think it matters. I did not call the police that day. I know some of you are going to have feelings about that. I had feelings about it too. But I want you to understand my thinking. If I called the police, there would be a report, there would be an arrest. There would be a process that I could not control and could not predict. Vivienne would be pulled into it. The business, which still had my name on a $95,000 loan, would almost certainly collapse mid-process. I would be emotionally public in a way that I was not ready for. What I decided instead was to be methodical. I called my attorney the next morning. Her name is Sandra, and she has been handling my affairs for 11 years. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I've always appreciated about her. Then she told me what my options were. The most important thing she told me, because I was the co-signer on the loan and the account was in default, I had legal standing to take action to protect my own financial interests. I could formally withdraw cooperation, notify the bank of material facts they might not be aware of, and pursue recovery against both signatories for damages to my credit. She also told me that since I had documentary evidence of my original $47,000 contribution, the wire transfer records, the emails from Vivienne at the time explicitly calling it startup funding tied to equity, I had grounds to pursue a claim against the business assets. I spent 2 weeks gathering documents, bank statements, emails, the original wire transfer, text messages from Vivienne referencing the loan, the business struggles, Terrence's decisions. I did not tell Vivienne what I was doing. I did not contact Terrence at all. I did go see my doctor. My cheek had healed on the outside, but I wanted it documented. She noted it in my file and referred me to a counselor, which I appreciated. I also photographed the bruising, which had spread more than I'd initially realized. During those 2 weeks, Vivienne called me 4 times. The first 2 times I let it go to voicemail. She said she was sorry. She said she didn't know why he did it. She said he was under so much stress. She said she loved me. The third time she called, I answered. I told her I loved her too. I told her I needed some time. She cried, and I held the phone and listened, and I didn't cry because I had already done my crying at 3 a.m. when no one could see it. The fourth call was Terrence. He said he wanted to apologize. He said he'd been under enormous pressure. He said he hoped I wouldn't make things worse for everyone. I didn't respond to that. I hung up. On a Tuesday morning in November, while Terrence was at a job site in Huntersville, I knew his schedule because Vivienne had mentioned it the week before without knowing why I was asking. Sandra filed the paperwork. We notified the bank of the default circumstances and formally requested they pursue the primary borrower. We filed a civil claim for recovery of the $47,000 original investment, plus damages from the credit impact. We sent a formal letter to the business's registered address, which meant Terrence received it that afternoon on his phone through his business email. He called me 17 times between 3 and 6 o'clock that day. I answered none of them. That evening, Vivienne came to my house. She knocked for a long time before I opened the door. When I did, she looked like she hadn't slept in days. She came inside and we sat in the living room, and she asked me why I had done it without telling her. I said, "Because I didn't trust that you would let me." She didn't have an answer for that. We talked for 3 hours that night. It was the first real conversation we'd had in years, not the scripted version, not the version where she was managing my reactions and protecting his feelings. The real one. She cried. I cried. I told her about counting. I told her I had gotten to 27 and that I had stood there and not moved because I needed her to see it clearly, without me fighting back, without any ambiguity about what was happening. She said, "Why didn't you say something? Why didn't you tell me how bad it had gotten?" I told her that some things a person has to see for themselves. The civil case took 7 months to resolve. Terrence's attorney tried several arguments, none of which held up particularly well given the documentation Sandra had prepared. The business folded before we even got to settlement. The combination of the defaulted loan, the existing lawsuit from the contract dispute, and the legal costs was more than it could survive. The settlement covered a portion of my original investment and addressed the credit damage. Terrence did not go to prison. I want to be honest about that because I don't want to wrap this in a bow it doesn't deserve. What he did to me was documented, but I chose a civil path, and a civil path has limits. He left Charlotte. I don't know exactly where he went, and I no longer try to find out. Vivienne filed for divorce in February of this year. She is living in a smaller apartment now, working for an architecture firm, rebuilding something that is entirely her own. We have dinner together most Sundays. Sometimes she talks about starting a new business someday. Something smaller, something different. I listen and I don't say much. It's her life to figure out. My credit has been restored. The $47,000 is partly back. The rest I have made peace with. It was the cost of knowing something I needed to know about myself, about my daughter, about how long I am willing to wait before I decide that enough is enough. I was 64 years old, standing in a kitchen, being hit by a man who had spent 6 years eating at my table, and I counted. I want to be clear about why I counted. It wasn't shock. It wasn't paralysis. I counted because I needed a number. I needed something exact and undeniable that no one could gaslight me out of later. I needed to walk out of that kitchen knowing what had happened in a way that was concrete and specific, and mine. 27. I have that number. I will always have it. And I want to say one more thing before I'm done. For anyone listening who is in a situation where the person hurting you is someone you love, someone you helped build something with, someone whose whole life you have held up at some point with your own two hands, the hardest part is not the moment of the violence. The hardest part is the months before it, when you are still explaining away the small things, still telling yourself it's stress, still convincing yourself that the version of them you first loved is the real one, and everything else is temporary. It is not temporary. You are not overreacting, and you are allowed to protect yourself methodically and legally and completely without waiting for anyone's permission. I didn't cry when I left that kitchen. I cried later, alone, when it was safe to, and then I got to work. I've been sitting with this story for a long time before I decided to tell it out loud, not because I'm ashamed, but because I wanted to make sure I understood it fully before I handed it to anyone else. What happened in that kitchen was not an accident. Terence didn't snap under pressure one random morning. The hitting was the end of a very long road that I had been watching him build, brick by brick, for 6 years. The way he spoke over Vivienne, the way he slowly replaced her opinions with his own, the way he said my name, Elaine, like I was a stranger who owed him something. Every one of those moments was a choice. And every time I stayed quiet, every time I told myself it was stress or adjustment or just how he was, I was also making a choice. That's the part I had to sit with the hardest. Not what he did. What I allowed to go on too long because I didn't want to be the kind of mother who caused trouble. Here's what I know now that I didn't let myself know then. Doing right by the people you love sometimes means being willing to be the difficult one in the room. It means telling the truth when the truth is unwelcome. It means trusting your instincts even when everyone around you seems comfortable with a version of events that requires you to stay small and quiet. That's not something I was born knowing. That's something Terence, in a terrible way, forced me to finally learn. The intelligence I needed in that situation wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a great revelation. It was just clarity, reading what was actually in front of me instead of what I wanted to see. The loan documents, the missed payments, the pattern of isolation. Everything I needed to understand what was happening was available to me. I just had to stop explaining it away and start reading it honestly. And the strength, the staying power, that is what I am most proud of. Not the lawsuit, not the settlement. The 2 weeks of quiet, methodical work after I left that kitchen, going to Sandra's office, pulling the bank records, seeing my doctor and letting her document what had been done to me. That kind of endurance doesn't look like anything from the outside. Nobody sees you sitting at your kitchen table at 11 o'clock at night going through wire transfer records, but that is where it actually happens. That is where you decide what you are made of. Vivienne is rebuilding now, slowly, carefully, on her own terms. I watch her, and I see the woman she was before all of this. Curious, capable. With that notebook she's already started filling again. I don't know exactly what she'll build next, but I know it will be hers. As for me, I still have my cat. I still have my house. I still have my Sunday dinners. And I have 27. I will always have that number, and I will never again wait that long before I decide that I matter too.